I want to talk about SDG 2, and I first want to start in this first 10 minutes or so to lay down several definitions or concepts that are used in the development goal, sustainable development goal, and also some of the trends that we have seen in the past time. So, the goal says end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Right? That's already quite a mouthful, but it's also quite vague, to be honest. So, for instance, food security. Right? You started, Remy, saying, is this very ambitious? Is this a very ambitious goal to try and achieve in 12 years? Food security, the term used by the UN is this: a situation that exists when all people at all times have physical, social and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Based on this definition, 4 food security dimensions can be identified. Food availability, let's see if this thing works, yes. Economic and physical access to food, food utilization and stability over time. Now, this is very interesting because what we see is that this is actually a very multi-faced, very complex bringing together of all things related to food. For instance, is there food? Do we have enough food? Is it lying around, right? But also, can we go and get it, right? Do we have the means to go and purchase it, or do we have the physical? Can we actually walk to a store, for instance? But also, do we know how to use it, or is the food that is there suitable for human consumption? And stability over time, meaning if it's there now, will it be there in 10 years' time, right? So this food security is a compact thing. So that's basically the main, I would say, goal of SDG 2. Now, so if you look at the reportages of the SDGs, they make a report every year about progress. Very briefly, we see now that world hunger is on the rise, right? We have seen several decades where there was a slowing down or a decrease of world hunger. It's on the rise. Main reasons given for that are conflict, drought and disasters. Also linked to climate change, although that is an ambiguous causal relation still to make. But just to lay down some figures, right? Figures are always complex, especially when they're round like this. But basically it means that currently, or in 2016, we are faced with 815 million people that are undernourished, right? So food insecure, undernourished. We'll look at that definition a little bit later also. Of which 151 million children that are so chronically undernourished that they stunt, meaning that they don't grow tall enough. You could say maybe that is already an expression of pygmatization, but that's the phrase we use for it. And 51 million that suffer from wasting, which is basically a more short-term response and something that you can also maybe overcome over time. And interestingly, 38 million that suffer from obesity. Obesitas. Right, so we can show it like this. This is the little graph that we see. 815 million people, which means 11% of the world population. You could say that's actually quite a large amount of people. Now, I want to show you some trends. This is the period 1990-92, and this is the period 2014-2016. Quite roughly, this correlates with the predecessor of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were the Millennium Development Goals, right? And you can see some trends that have, or you can see how the distribution of hunger changed over time. One thing I can ask you, but we don't have much time to do that, but I can immediately show you that actually something that is surprising is that in the long run, we see that if we look at all these figures, that the amount of hungry people goes down and the percentage of hungry people also goes down, right? So there's a positive trend, and overall the reports that I encounter and that we see is that there is a long-term positive trend. Fewer people are becoming hungry. Notably, we have some threats like population growth, climate change, and so on and so forth. We'll get to that a little bit later. But there is one notable exception, which is quite interesting, but also, worrying, and that is Sub-Saharan Africa. So, in 1990-92, there were 176 million people undernourished, hungry, And now, or 2016, 220 million, right? So that is actually the oddball in the room. If you look at Eastern Asia, or Southern Asia would be a better example, because that's also one that does not decrease very fast. Southern Asia here went down from 291 to 281,000. Still holds the largest share of hungry people in the world, and that largest share is also rising a bit. But in absolute numbers, the hunger is coming down. So except for Sub-Saharan Africa. Well, there's something that I want to sort of put in your mind, something that we have to talk about, right? Why is that region so specific? Can we also zoom in on that a little bit more? Before we get there, we discussed that maybe we talk about hunger, the second speaker, in different terms. And I thought we could maybe mention some of the terms that we use. We talked about food security, hunger, undernourishment, or chronic hunger, right? The definition would be that it is a state of inability to acquire enough food, right? Basically, you don't have enough food, quite clearly, to meet dietary energy requirements. Undernutrition, then, is the outcome of undernourishment, right? Either because of poor absorption or poor biological use of nutrients, so this can also be partly linked to disease or other more health-related issues. So this can also be the reason caused by bad food, right? Let's say, low-quality food. But all of this basically is used synonymously with malnutrition. It's also a term you used, Remy, earlier. So what I suggest is we use them all. We talk about food security, undernourishment, undernutrition, chronic hunger, malnutrition, because basically it indicates the same. Not enough food for people, or not enough food that is healthy enough to live a decent life. And we can later maybe specify that more if that needs be. Right, so now this is interesting. This is a map. It's a little bit different, but also a little bit the same as the earlier statistic I showed you. But this is a map of the achievements of the Millennium Development Goal hunger target. The target was ambitious, as SDG 2 is, but basically it was, between 1990 and 2015, reduced by half the proportion of people who suffer from hunger. So it's not ending world hunger, hunger. Sorry. Talking too fast, I suppose, because I have a 10-minute deadline. It's not ending world hunger, it's halving it. I suppose at that time that was quite ambitious. What do we see? We see in green, you see the developed world, if you will, is actually left out of the equation altogether, right? It's ambiguous because there is some hunger here as well, or malnutrition, or hidden hunger, as we term it. But what do we see in the developing regions of the world? In green are countries that achieved that particular development goal. So not necessarily the end of hunger, but the halving of it. In yellow, we see that they partially achieved that, or are underway of achieving it, but did not achieve it. And in red, it's out of the question altogether. What I find interesting about this map are several things, and I think the next PowerPoint shows it. Yes. Clearly, again, following the other graph, it's predominantly Sub-Saharan Africa, or partly Northern Africa. In the year 2016, that shows the problematic area in attaining this goal. Another thing that is surprising, or that stands out, is that it are actually countries with a particular conflict legacy, which may be long-lasting or a little bit less long-lasting, but for instance, we can look at Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, North Korea, what is this? South Sudan. Sorry? Central Africa. Yeah, you're right, I should have worn my glasses. South Sudan actually doesn't have figures. Congo doesn't have figures. Sudan doesn't have figures, so that's actually, we don't even know, but we also know, if you will. So what I think is interesting if we want to talk about SDG 2, and I see my time is running out, so I have to finish up, is that we not necessarily talk only about how can we get more hunger into the world, but we also try to find out how does this relate to politics, right? So we have the conflict areas or the political complexities in certain areas that stand out on this map. And also to bring that down, if we zoom in that regard on Sub-Saharan Africa, to that great sort of prediction of a 4-time overhaul of the population of Sub-Saharan Africa, right? Suspected to grow from 1 billion to 4 billion people between now and 2100. That is the stress, I think, that is interesting and that I want to zoom into. So I'm going to talk about technology, politics, and population.